You know, it's really starting to feel like everywhere I go, I am greeted by total morons who claim that there are more than two genders.
Because nothing starts off a video better than calling everyone who disagrees with you a moron.
Shadow man, shadow box, dance in the dark with me.
Hunter Avallone is a secular conservative. That's it. That's his whole thing. Alright, I'm not ContraPoint, so you're not going to get some in-depth character analysis here, but to sum him up, he loves Trump, he hates liberals, and he loves to bash on gay people and trans people. He also has nearly 500,000 subscribers, so that's scary. Anyway, let's get into his video. Guess what? There are only two genders. And because I'm already feeling kind of sick of this guy, I want to go right into his main point and debunk it outright.
Again, gender is not a social construct. Gender and sex are different, but gender is closely connected to sex. There are only two genders to match the two existing sexes. Nothing more, nothing less.
Alright, well, human sex is bimodal, not binary. You see, in a binary system, there are only two options, like ones and zeros. But with human sex, there are two peaks and plenty of outliers. The catch-all term for those outliers is called intersex. So, to say there are only two existing sexes, nothing more, nothing less, is false, because there's more than just the two. And since there's more than just two binary sexes, that would mean that by your logic, there would be more than two binary genders. While I could end the video there and honestly be perfectly fine in doing so, a lot of people may not be convinced by that. So, I'm going to go through his entire video, find the points that are worth talking about, and break them down. Hunter also has no relevant sources, so this really won't take too long.
I mean, whether it's frickin' Lacey Green, Milo Stewart, or even dumb things I see on Facebook, this whole idea that there's more than two genders is really starting to get out of hand. We have here a list of the wonderful 58 genders you can choose from while signing into Facebook.
Alright, so this is where the main problem comes from. Thinking of sex and gender in terms of a binary skews the way you perceive this kind of stuff. When someone unacquainted with all the theory and stuff reads, Facebook now has 58 gender options, they think, well, that's stupid. There are only two genders, not 58. It ends up alienating people who may be sympathetic to gender issues by making them think it's a choice between 2 and 58 genders. That's why I like to use the rainbow analogy.
Simple question here. How many colors are on this rainbow? Now, some of you guys will say 7, Roy, G, Biv. But when you think about it, there's not a set number of colors on a rainbow. It's a spectrum. While there are main peaks, you could find cyan in there, or pink, and plenty of other colors. If I were to say there are only 7 colors on this rainbow, nothing more, nothing less, I would be wrong. Now, here's where things get a bit complicated, because on one side you have a bit of bad communication on gender theory, but on the other side you have woeful misrepresentation. I know a lot of people who are tolerant of trans issues, but think the idea of 76 genders is crazy. You see, the problem is how we frame the issue. People hear the figure and think that there are 76 separate genders. And I'm not here to defend the 76 figure either. My point is, it's not 76 or 58 separate genders, it's 58 names for points on the gender spectrum. You see, because we're hardwired to like binaries and patterns, we want a number. Something easy to digest and quote. But the question itself is malformed. Gender is on a spectrum. There's not a set number of genders, just like there's not a set number of colors on a rainbow. There are recognizable peaks, but an indefinite amount of points between those peaks. So there's not 76 separate genders, and there's not 2 binary genders. So, I guess both sides are wrong on this one. What do you know?
Anyway, Hunter's next point was even weaker than the first.
Our society and history has led us to believe over thousands of years that there are only people who are male and people who are female. But that is because past society has based gender on physical sex.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was science that did that. And no, we weren't led to believe this over a long period of time. It's time to cut this BS. Gender is not a social construct. And for the people who claim it is, I would ask you, if gender is a social construct, how come transgender people need to undergo real physical surgery in order to change a social construct?
Okay, well, there is a lot wrong with that. So, I'll break it down into 2 parts. Easiest to dismiss is his point about trans people. Hunter doesn't seem to understand how transitioning works. You You see, he's repeating the transphobic argument that you're not really trans until you get a surgery. But this notion falls apart on many levels. The most obvious is that the first step in transitioning is the social transition. At the beginning, trans people often change their name, start dressing differently, and start using a different pronoun. You're not the gender you were assigned at birth right up until surgery. A trans woman or trans man in the social transition is still a trans woman or a trans man. Hunter's viewpoint is flawed because with it, you have to draw a strict line between genders. And that gets really dicey real quick.
If you draw the line of reassignment surgery, you bar people who aren't able to afford the surgery for being trans, which is bad. If you draw the line at HRT, you bar people who can't afford it or have a family that won't allow them to start treatment, which is also bad. And if you draw the line at passing, then it's going to vary because what a man or woman looks like is very different in other cultures and to other people. This often leads to cis people being followed into bathrooms or put into the wrong jail because they look trans. There's not a strict line you cross when transitioning because gender itself is not rigid.
So Hunter used that as his example that gender isn't a social construct, and also had this to say about it.
And now a moment of truth with Hunter Avallone.
Oh, hello. There are only two genders. According to the Book of Truth, page 67, verse 11, there are only two genders. Anyone who claims to be anything other than male or female is an attention whore, whose dad probably left them for very good reasons. Thank you, and have a great day.
You might notice that Hunter had no real sources to back him up. That's because his whole argument is just based in tradition, which, by the way, is a logical fallacy.
When people say that gender is a social construct, they're usually talking about gender roles and societal genders. You see, different societies have different understandings of gender, and gender roles differ from culture to culture and era to era. A great example of this is the Mosoa in southwest China. It was a matriarchal society. Heritage was passed down the female side of the family, and women are the heads of the households. Another example is the Samoa, basically before the 1800s. They were a matriarchal society, and that actually only changed after Christian influences came to the island. There are also plenty of cultures with historic third genders. Groups like the Mujiz in Oaxaca State, Mexico, the Hijira in India, who, by the way, have a legally recognized third gender, and the Two-Spirit in early Navajo tribes. The Two-Spirit is actually more interesting because it actually started to fade away only when Christian and homophobic influences came from Europe by settlers. But that's a whole thing for another day. I'm going to leave a few links in the description about it. But either way, his claim that there's always been only two genders is wrong because these cultures have been around for hundreds of years. Now, you could claim that these cultures are wrong, but then you're just getting into some cultural superiority stuff, and that's not good.
Those are basically his main points worth breaking down. Hunter also claims that being non-binary doesn't exist, but his rationale for that was based on gender as a binary. If gender is on a spectrum, that would mean that there are people who lie in between the peaks or who don't identify with their society's current binary. That's just how spectrums work. So while his point about the validity of non-binary people isn't really worth a whole segment, I did want to talk about his worst case scenario.
I mean, like I've already said, gender and sex are different, but you cannot completely disregard sex since gender is so closely connected to sex. If you do stuff like that, stuff like this happens. Gender fluid performer, Kelly Mantle, eligible in male and female Oscar categories. Fantastic! So you can just say you're gender fluid and then get the privilege of being entered into both categories?
First of all, Mantle was eligible for both, but could only be nominated for one. She's not going to be nominated twice for the same award. People say that this is an extra privilege, but this isn't a new idea. In the same year, Mahershala Ali was eligible for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor for his role in Moonlight. But no one really complained about that one, did they? There's also been another similar case to this, but it happened after Hunter made his video, so I guess I'll give him a pass. But non-binary performer Asia Kate Dillon chose to be considered under actor for their Emmy nomination. So it seems like, for now at least, gender-neutral performers will be considered under actor for the time being. Also, if this is like a big problem, just integrate the acting categories. Now, you may think that sounds kind of unreasonable, but the Grammys did that back in 2012 and no one really made a fuss about it. The best rapper is the best rapper, and the best actor is the best actor, regardless of gender. Things in our society as trivial as an award show that are based in a gender binary aren't good reasons to keep that binary. just because the current system is ill-equipped for change, that doesn't negate the need for actual change.
One thing you begin to notice is that even from a right-wing perspective, there's no real social downside that comes from non-binary people. There's no society-destroying consequence of their existence. And even if we were wrong, there's still no real downside to calling somebody they. There's no harm. Now, the trap that many fall in is the view that because no one's getting hurt, I'll just play along, This isn't really a thing, but I'll use your silly pronouns if it makes you feel better. And don't get me wrong, this is much better than outright bigotry, but it's still not great. Being non-binary is a valid way to live your life. If you want to get all logical about it, if gender lies on a spectrum, then there are people who lie in between the common extremes. And some of them won't really identify as a man or a woman. How they want to express their gender may not fall within the gender lines that their society has. And that's okay. You're entitled to your own gender expression, I'm entitled to mine. None of us are incorrect in our gender expression because there's no right way to do gender. Unless you think you're funny and say you're an attack helicopter. Then you're just being dumb.
So that's all I have to say about Hunter's video, but to try and cover my tracks, I'm going to debunk my own video before anybody else can. To do that, I'm going to go through the main or strongest counter-arguments to my points and see which ones have validity. The first problem somebody would have would probably be my use of intersex people in my argument that sex is bimodal. There are two big objections that both don't quite work. Number one is the Steven Crowder objection that because intersex is so rare, that it's not relevant in the discussion. What he misses is that actually about 1.7% of the world is intersex. That's more people than there are Jews. It's also a large enough group to be relevant in the discussion of sexes. And dismissing a group as too small to be regarded is the definition of marginalization. And marginalization is bad. Number two would be the Blair White point that intersex is real, but a quote, birth deformity. It's not. Intersex is a catch-all term for people with variations in their sex characteristics, but it doesn't come from malformation in the womb like a birth defect. A good comparison is having red hair. The amount of intersex people in the world is similar to the amount of redheaded people in the world, and they both come from a mutation. They're both rare, yet are both naturally occurring and innate. Intersex people are regular people, just like redheads. You see, what happens in both of these cases is that intersex people have to be dismissed to maintain the idea that gender is a binary. But even if they were rare, or if it wasn't naturally occurring, it would still poke holes in the binary idea, because if you have more than two, it's not a binary anymore. It's bimodal. The next point somebody would disagree with would probably be that gender's on a spectrum. But there's not really any strong logic to refute the idea that gender's on a spectrum that doesn't come from, gender being a binary. The closest that I could find was actually from TERFs, and it basically said that if gender's on a spectrum, then everybody's non-binary. It kind of sounds like the whole reasoning that, if sexual orientation's on a spectrum, that would make everybody bisexual. But neither of those work, It just means that one side or one peak is best described as male, and the other side or other peak is best described as female, and there's going to be a lot of space in between. Simple as that.
Now, before we move on, I think it's important to define what gender is. I like to split gender into three parts. 1, gender expression, how you outwardly show your gender. Examples of this would be like, your mannerisms, your expressions, your appearance. 2, societal genders and gender roles, the social roles that encompass genders, as well as the genders themselves. Like man, woman, or hijira. And 3, gender identity, which societal gender you best align with, like woman, trans man, or non-binary.
The main argument against gender as a social construct is the conflation of societal gender and gender expression. What you usually get is people who say that, because a trans woman's identity was kind of innate, that disproves the idea that gender is a social construct. This usually comes from them thinking that we think that gender isn't real or it's not a thing at all, but that's a misrepresentation. Societal gender is the one that we call a social construct. This doesn't mean that it's not real, but that it varies from place to place. An example that ContraPoints used is that money is a social construct. Money is a real thing, but it also is dependent on where you are. Because if you take your pesos to Nigeria, you can't buy anything with them. There's no universal laws of money. In the same way, you can't completely reduce societal gender to biology. That's why there's so many different genders around the world. So, for better clarification, societal gender and gender roles are a social construct, not gender expression. My last point would be that I'm not here to defend the original BBC video that Hunter talked about. To be honest, I probably agree with him in that it's a pretty bad video, 90 seconds is not enough time to explain something this complicated. It kind of reminds me of BuzzFeed style content in that it's made as if it's trying to address people who believe in a gender binary, but it doesn't do nearly enough to actually change anybody's minds. Realistically, it's just preaching to the choir. If you really wanted to change people's minds, you would take out the jokes, add in some historical examples, some sources, and probably some better analogies, but I don't really think that was their intent. So this is usually the normal point in the video where you expect some deep analysis of the creator's psyche, but that's not why I'm here. Hunter does this stuff because it gets him money. I think that's just about it. It seems from his early stuff that he wanted to do comedy videos, but he realized that if he made reactionary content, he can get more views. And considering the abysmally low bar for right-wing content on YouTube, he was able to get a following pretty fast. Now, he has a base that comes to him every week for validation, and I think he's probably happy with that. They have this innate assumption that they're automatically right about everything, and they don't even have to consider the viewpoints of others. I think this is best summed up when he calls everyone who disagrees with him a moron in the first 30 seconds of his video. He doesn't really care about logic or reasons to back up his claims, so he just relies on ad hominems. You see, it's not about helping his audience learn stuff, it's just about being a validation game.
That's why this video isn't really aimed at Hunter. He makes way too much money, and the blowback from publicly changing his mind would be insane. I'm hoping that if you're a fan of Hunter Avallone and you think that I made some good points, maybe you can reevaluate your stance a little bit. You don't have to become a leftist or anything, just think about the spectrum idea a bit. You never know. Maybe I'm the one reasonable SJW on YouTube. Hi, thank you guys for watching. This video took me way longer than it should have. I'm pretty new to this stuff, so feedback and constructive criticism will always be welcome in the comments. Other than that, feel free to subscribe. I'm Nightingale. I'll see you guys next time.